Good evening and welcome to Slave Food Conversations, where two African American physicians explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in African American communities, irrespective of income. They discovered that eating a whole food, plant-based diet in urban communities is not only possible, but is the key to eliminating health disparities. Dr. Columbus Batiste is an interventional cardiologist in Southern California. Dr. Batiste is a passionate double board certified interventional cardiologist who has incorporated the power of whole food plant-based diet combined with exercise and stress reduction in his management of patients. Dr. Eric Walsh serves as medical director for urgent care services. Dr. Walsh has a double doctorate in medicine and public health. Dr. Walsh is passionate about educating people on ways to improve their mental, physical, and spiritual health. As a result, he has taken his God-given talents across the world and has given lectures and sermons on every continent. This evening, we are joined by Dr. Yami, who is a board-certified pediatrician, certified lifestyle medicine physician, national board-certified health and wellness coach, author, podcast host, and professional speaker. She's a passionate promoter of healthy lifestyles, especially in the power of plant-based diets for the prevention of chronic disease. She founded VeggieFitKids.com, where she provides information on plant-based diets for children. She also hosts the podcast Veggie Doctor Radio. She obtained a certificate in plant-based nutrition, is a certified Food for Life instructor, and a Jack Canfield Success Principles certified training. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics and a diplomat of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. She owns Nourish Wellness, a pediatric practice in Washington, where she lives with her husband and two active children. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yes, thank you, Danette. Well, welcome. It is indeed a pleasure. I'll tell you, we spent some time together inside of Michigan, and that was quite a trip there. That was one of the first times back in this COVID era that I kind of got in front of an audience. And I'll tell you, it was invigorating, but it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, too.
Yes. And Dr. Walsh, how are you? It's good to see you.
I'm good. I'm excited. I think we have an amazing guest on for us tonight. So I can't wait for us to begin to kind of peel away and get all this information, especially as it relates to children. A lot of our shows, we don't talk a lot about kids, just because we're focused a lot of times just on adult issues. But recently, that's something I myself have been looking at more are things that actually happen to us in childhood and before even that affects health for the lifespan. I spoke on that last week at the Pediatrician Conference in California. And so this is great timing. So I'm excited because I really want to get into this and really hear a lot of what you have to say.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, for sure. And one of the things I think that was most interesting, and just always like to kind of just introduce you to the audience and to each other and kind of set a little familiarity. And I was struck by the fact I did not know you're a Panamanian, and so share with us like your favorite Panamanian dish. What's a Panamanian dish that you would serve Eric and myself if we came to your home?
Okay, well, let me just tell you that Panamanian food it's very wholesome, actually, and we love the flavor of our food without a lot of seasonings. So some people that are used to having things like a lot of hot sauce and stuff like that may be a little surprised and shocked because you're used to, a lot of people kind of generalize all Latin Americans, right? So they think of like Mexican food and like really spicy food and stuff like that. But Panamanian food is actually quite plain, but I think it's because we can appreciate the natural flavors. And the staples in Panama, rice, of course, corn, a lot of corn dishes, plantain, beans, lots of different kinds of beans. So one of my favorite dishes is arroz con guandú y coco. And that is rice with pigeon peas, and it's cooked together. And actually, whenever you make it traditionally in Panama, you're using the fresh pigeon peas, which you can find them here canned, but it's really hard to find them. But then also there's coconut, like fresh coconut milk that you're getting from the coconut and cooking that all together. It's so delicious. And then you can have that with like a side of like baked plantain, some tomatoes, a little bit of avocado. My mouth is literally watering right now. This is my favorite dish. I just love it.
I love it. That's great. Well, I'm gonna tell you what, you just described it in such a way that I
I'm
can't
about
wait
to
to
say,
try
you're very good at that. You should be doing commercials.
I love food. What can I say? Okay, you got.
I can't repeat one thing you said.
You can trust me when it comes to food. Okay.
Well, and it's interesting because this is also Hispanic heritage.
Yes.
And so I think that's actually very appropriate. My wife is Puerto Rican, and so a lot of the dishes are kind of similar.
Yes.
You also just my family's Jamaican. You also describe like Jamaican rice and peas too, with the coconut milk and stuff. So those are very, like you said, very wholesome foods.
Yes.
A lot of root foods. The yuca, which we call cassava.
Yes.
These are sweet potatoes, really good healthy foods. And unfortunately, a lot of us come to the States and we give up on all of those foods.
Yes.
We only serve them on Sundays, and we eat, American food the rest of the week, and that kind of can be a problem.
Yeah. And I grew up in Texas, and I started going to the school here in the first grade. So I would spend the school year in the United States, and then I would spend 3 months out of the year in Panama for my summer break with my grandparents. And it was a big difference because when I was in the United States, I was eating my sugary cereal for breakfast and frozen burritos and, frozen microwave meals and things like that. And then I would go to Panama and have more of the rice and beans. And I loved all foods always. So I've never been a selective child, but it was a radical difference of kind of like the 80s, early 90s latchkey kid with a lot of processed foods versus the Panamanian foods that were more whole.
Yeah. And isn't that's one thing that's so consistent that we're seeing, across the board, is just this evolution in America of standard American diet and so forth. But so when I was reading and listening up on some of your background, I understood that you read the book Born to Run, and that's one of the things that helped switch you over. And it's so ironic, just really with the trajectory of Game Changers movie and really how that's influenced an entire new generation to really trowel out plant-based eating. But tell us about that. So you're a natural runner and athlete then, I take it.
Yeah, so it was completely random. No, I would never have considered myself a runner. So I'm telling you that running is one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me, because I did track in junior high and it was like the worst experience of my life and I hated it. And one time I even faked a panic attack so that I didn't have to run because I was so slow. And, of course, it's I should have had growth mindset, but I can't go back right now and be growth mindset yourself, Yami, and just run the race. Anyway, so one day we were in Whistler, British Columbia, and for some reason out of nowhere, I just got the urge to start running. It was completely random. So I actually went downstairs to one of the stores. Wow. We were staying in this hotel that had the commercial stuff in the first floor. And I bought a pair of running shoes and I started running that day randomly. And then I started doing long distance running. However, I've always suffered from plantar fasciitis since I was in medical school. Anatomy lab is what triggered it. And since then I had always kind of, struggled with it. And I was looking for different ways to try to overcome the plantar fasciitis. And at the time when I was doing my half marathons, it was barefoot running was the thing. And so I wanted to try it. So I was, I love when I want to try something new, I immerse myself in the topic. So I was reading all the books, doing all the videos, that kind of thing. And so I found the book Born to Run because I wanted to learn about barefoot running. But in the book, they have Scott Jurek, who is a famous vegan ultra athlete. But then they also focused on this group of indigenous people in Mexico called the Tarahumara, the running people. And it was one of those things. I'm reading the book and I'm like, okay, this athlete that's winning all these awards and running all these races in extreme conditions doesn't eat meat or dairy or eggs. And then we have this whole culture that they're life revolves around running, and they don't eat very many animal products. They're not falling apart and disintegrating. And I had this cognitive dissonance because, as y'all know, in medical school and in residency, we're taught like basically, your patients aren't eating meat, and especially if they're not having dairy, you need to be worried, right? You need to be worried they're going to have a deficiency. Their calcium's not going to be good, and so it was a
Protein.
complete protein. It was a complete mismatch from what I had been taught, and my brain was suddenly like, these people seem to be thriving. So there's something going on here. And again, this divine intervention in my life that's random, I just got the thought, I'm going to try it. I'm just going to see what it feels like. What would it feel like to not eat any animal products for 30 days? And I just on a whim decided to do it. I didn't tell anybody in my family. And what's really funny is I didn't really have any expectations because I read the book mostly for my feet and I want to see, could I get more energy? How am I going to feel? But within 3 days of changing my diet, my chronic, lifelong, genetic constipation was cured. And so, I was taking Miralax every day as an adult. Okay.
Wow.
Like, this was like my family gene. Everybody in the family is constipated. So it must be just a genetic thing. It was better in 3 days. And of course, you know the rest of the story. I felt great. I had more energy. My moods felt stabilized. And that's when I was really like, okay, there's something here. I started watching all the documentaries, read the books, started looking into the literature. And at the end of the 30 days, there was no going back. It was like, no, I feel great. This is definitely the way. I just never knew this. And that's when it changed my career because I took another month. I did the research for children to make sure that it indeed was safe for children. I changed over my whole household to a plant-based diet. And here I am 11 years later.
So how'd your husband take that?
So I have a very nice husband, and he doesn't like to cook or do any of the grocery shopping. So he was like, okay, that's fine. At home, I'll eat whatever you make because I'm a good cook. So he trusted that it would be good. And he was like, well, when go out to restaurants or whatever, I'll get my own thing. And then he said, is it okay if I buy my lunch meat and my cheese and I put it in the fridge? And I was like, okay, I'm going to have this one little drawer for you where you can put your stuff. It only lasted 1 week because he realized that he really didn't like grocery shopping. So it's like, whatever, I'll just deal with whatever you make me. And, his evolution's different. He's not one of the all or nothing sort of people like me. But he is an athlete and he is intense about his hiking and his mountain biking and his skiing. He likes all of those extreme adventure sports. And he realized over the years that when he would have meat outside of the home, he felt sluggish and heavy and he wouldn't perform as well. So naturally over time, he's just gravitated to the plants, mostly because he feels so good and he's able to perform in his sports the way he wants to.
That's great. It is. That's great. I mean, and this idea of it's almost, you kind of described, it wasn't completely intuitive, but once you intuitively start learning, recalling the plant-rich foods that you had eaten throughout when you were inside of Panama and some of the other things to do. And so obviously your book is Intuitive Eating. And so tell us a bit about that and how, especially for kids, applying it for kids.
Yeah. Well, let me go back real quick to what you said.
Yeah, please.
Something I think is important for people to know. My family in Panama to this day are dairy farmers.
Wow.
So I grew up with a lot of dairy. So that's why I was constipated, whether I was in the US or Panama. Okay. Yeah. I ate a lot of beans when I was in Panama, but I also drank a lot of milk. And because my family is dairy farmers, dairy was way up high priority importance. Okay. So to this day, they're still dairy farmers. I can't get them out of the business quite yet. But then going back to the intuitive eating question, that was something that I had to learn over time because I was a larger bodied child. And, I like I said earlier, I love to eat. I never have missed a meal. Okay. So, I love food. And when I was about 8 or 9, my family started to become concerned about my body size, started making comments, took me to the doctor. I started, got on my first diet, and then it was decades of yo-yo dieting up and down. So I really lost touch with my body. I started really focusing on restricting calories and going from restricting to binging, and really just had a really difficult few decades in my life of this up and down dieting and negative body image and self-loathing and all of that. So it was around the same time when I discovered plant-based nutrition that I actually learned about intuitive eating and a non-diet approach to life. And putting those two together, I think, has revolutionized my life. But then as a pediatrician, I started realizing that as parents, we become so anxious about what our kids are or aren't eating that we actually help them unlearn intuitive eating as well. So intuitive eating itself is a set of 10 principles that was created by a couple of dietitians, and they have a book called Intuitive Eating. And those principles really are to help guide people to a gentler way of feeding themselves that relies more on their own signals for hunger and satiety and going away from diet culture. So I took that concept and simplified it for parents and really gave parents a set of principles to practice at home. And one of them is to honor the hunger and satiety of their child. And that's a big one, especially when we have toddlers and preschoolers. You know, kids are naturally selective around that age. And so it's very difficult for parents. And so in my book, I help take those concepts to help parents learn how to feed their children, not just what to feed their children.
That's huge right there, because I mean, I think all of us, well, I don't want to speak for you, Eric, but you know, you're in this environment where it's like, okay, finish your plate. You're not getting up until you finish all the food on your plate.
My family.
Don't even think about it. And you're like, I don't want to eat, you know, or whatever it may be. And I think that's breaking that, which is just kind of ingrained in you in observed behavior or observed kind of that nurturing. It's really hard. Yes. It's hard for yourself and for obviously for the kids.
And how do you, so what you're saying is amazing. Describe a little bit more about it, like what intuitive eating kind of like is. I think first for a child, and then I know you're a pediatrician, but how do you then undo that as an adult? Because like Dr. Batiste is saying, I mean, you would get a whooping in some of my circles if you try to get up and leave food on the plate. Like you have to have, sometimes our cousins would trade plates and stuff, and we trying all kinds of stunts.
Hide it up.
You could really get in trouble. And what we say in Jamaica is, before good food waste, make belly bust, right? Before good food goes to waste, let your belly burst. I mean, literally, that's what we were taught.
Wow.
So as a child, what does that mean? And then as an adult, how do you undo that?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's never too late to relearn intuitive eating and to learn how to tune back into our bodies. But the good news is we're all born with the ability to eat intuitively. And I think we know this with our babies, you know, like babies, they give us hunger signals. They're kind of rooting around. And of course, a late hunger signal is like, give me my food, you know, when they start crying, we breastfeed them or we give them a bottle. And then when they're done, they pull away. And we're not trying to like force that baby to eat. That would just it would seem cruel, right? And so the majority of parents, they realize that with their infants, but then as their children become toddlers and become more active and actually don't need as many calories, and they're focused on developing and learning their environment, parents start to panic. And that's when parents start to say, you need to eat more, take another bite, you need to eat more. And then of course, parents start to worry about nutrients and think that something really horrible is going to happen to their child if they don't eat their vegetables that day. So you need to eat your broccoli before you can have this. You can't have dessert until you eat your spinach, you know, those kinds of things. And research shows that by the age of 5, these tactics that we use actually helps children unlearn intuitive eating. Wow. Okay. And it happens the other way too. So when parents are concerned that their child has a larger body size, like what happened to me, if a parent starts restricting food, that also backfires. So whenever we try to force kids to eat food, research shows that they actually eat less and less variety. And whenever we restrict food from a child because we're worried about their body size, they actually become more attached to food. Food becomes more attractive to them. And that's when they start sneaking and hiding and, doing these things where they're acting out of control around food. It's because they've developed this difficult relationship with the food.
Wow.
That's huge. That's insightful. I mean, could you have been around when I was when my kids were just starting out? That would have been good if I met you then.
But you say it's not too late to go back to that. So what advice do you give adults to?
The number one thing is stop dieting. And I think in the plant-based community, we have an advantage, right? Because we know that whole plant foods are naturally low in calorie density. They're filling. You don't have this, when y'all remember the diets back in the 80s, it's like this little cup of yogurt and like a chicken breast, and you're like starving all day. That's not what it is to eat a whole food plant-based diet. When you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you can have voluminous amounts of food and you can feel satisfied. So that's the advantage that we have when we're eating this way. But there's still some people that they may be overly attached to a certain number on the scale, or they might also have some habits like emotional eating. There's a lot of stress in our lives. Y'all talk a lot about stress, and one of our coping mechanisms might be eating. So we have these relationships with food that are actually against intuitive eating. Right. So the first thing is to be aware of those things, give up the dieting and calorie counting and all of that, and then just simply start tuning in. Tune in to when you actually feel hungry. There's some people that have gone years without ever experiencing hunger because they're afraid of hunger, or because they're on, some sort of plan where they're just like, I need to eat every 6 hours, this amount, this kind of thing. So let yourself get hungry, experience hunger, see what that feels like. And then as you start eating, be mindful and experience when you're starting to feel satisfied. And, you can kind of judge it. And the thing about intuitive eating is that it's not about perfection. It's not about rules. It's not about this many calories or this much volume. Intuitive eaters, they live a normal life. They go to parties, they go out to eat, they go on vacation. So yeah, sometimes you're going to eat so much that you feel uncomfortable. The most important thing to do there is to tune in and be aware of that. Wow, I ate a lot because that was really delicious, or I was distracted because I was talking to my friends, and then just reflect back on that. Is this something that I like to do? Do I like to feel this way? Next time, maybe I can stop a little sooner so I don't feel this way. And so it's not about being mean to yourself or being ashamed of any of these habits that we've developed. It's about tuning in, being mindful, and moving forward in a way that really honors your body.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so with my patients and the people in the community that I will, so to speak, coach up, I always speak to that idea of mindfulness and being that self-awareness of what are you feeling in that moment that you're seeking whatever particular thing, this food or alcohol or whatever it may be. What are you feeling? And are you using it as a medicine, or are you using it because you just generally enjoy it? How do you feel afterwards? And I always go off the field test. So after you do a trial of whatever type of eating whole foods, how do you feel afterwards? And I think that that's so extremely important to have individuals, that self-awareness, that degree of mindfulness, or that intuition, that intuitive eating type of approach that you're describing.
Absolutely.
I'll jump in. When I did it during my preventive medicine residency, we had to do an addiction medicine stint, like a half a year, like 6 months of it. And I learned a lot. And last weekend, when I was at the pediatrician conference speaking on food addiction, one of the things I said is that I learned a lot about food addiction because we didn't learn about food addiction in preventive medicine, ironically. We learned about drug addiction and chemical addictions. But one of the things that those veterans at the VA hospital at Loma Linda would say is, God made the human heart so big, only he can fill it. And what they were trying to say is, in this life, if you try and fill the God-sized hole in your heart with like cocaine or alcohol, you're going to become addicted to it because there's something so much bigger that you need. And so I translated that to food. And when I did, I realized there you do the studies, there are more serotonin receptors in the GI tract than there are in the brain. I mean, so literally a lot of times we're self-medicating with food. And it speaks to how unhealthy we are outside of the dining room and away from the refrigerator, that when we want comfort, we're drawn to that room, to that space, and to the refrigerator. So we can't eat intuitively because we're eating to treat something that food can't treat. Yes. The hole is too big. And so it's a frightening thing because, again, like you said, the world is stressful. It's, quote unquote dangerous. I mean, I've been making a list for a talk I'm giving tomorrow. I mean, we have the floods in Pakistan, hurricane that just poured through the Puerto Rico and just past Bermuda. You have war in the Ukraine that they just ramped it up. You have inflation. You have the rise in interest rates. I could go. I mean, I've got a list of stuff here.
Stress.
And when you look at the death of the Queen and the reactions to that, when you look at all of that, you can sometimes, and that's not even what touches us as individuals. That's just the noise around us. And so it seems so calming to sit with a slice of pizza and a thing of Coca-Cola and start eating. And it seems like all of it just disappears. But part of that is because we're eating not to feel full or satisfied, but to escape.
Exactly. To numb. And to create a buffer for our emotions. But absolutely. I think the other reason why it's so common, and all of us as humans have done this before. So I don't think any human is immune to ever having done this. And even intuitive eaters emotionally eat and that kind of thing. But it's so socially acceptable and it's actually encouraged. So if you watch any amount of TV, the commercials constantly are supersize it, treat yourself, indulge. So basically there's signals all around on eating more. And that's what I talk about in the book too, is that we want to create a positive environment. So we need to be careful of what media we're watching, what messages we're absorbing, because a lot of these advertisements also target children. And so children start to learn these habits too, that if I feel bad, to be happy, what do? I eat. So yeah, we have to be really careful about that.
One of the things in the talk I gave last week that floored me when I was doing the research for it is they've documented that stress eating in children begins as early as 4 years old. I was like, man, I said, when I was 4 years old, did I stress eat? I said, I probably did.
Well, you think about it, right? So, I mean, what happens when you're crying? It's actually instilled into you. When you're crying, someone gives you a piece of candy. Oh, calm down. It's okay. I'll get you a treat. When you're upset, this happened at school. Okay, I'm gonna stop off and get you something. So this learned behavior takes on a life of its own. And so that's not surprising. Actually, I was shocked when you just said that. And as I started thinking, I could see the connection and the correlation that can be built into kids. But here's the thing too, as well. And this is the hard part when it comes to processed foods and so forth, is that the food industry really, they do conspire against you. And so when the emulsifiers are inside the fast food that block the CCK and the sense of fullness, or they interfere with ghrelin and leptin and alter the appetite, that now there is actually a chemical conduit that plays a role that interferes with the ability of the body to be intuitive, the ability to truly be mindful. And so in the way you sense the food and the calories and so forth. And so it does become a vicious cycle. It does become a vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. No. And so some of you have these 5 pillars. I think you've kind of gone through majority of them there already, in terms of like the honor your hunger and satiety, and the whole foods, and the positive environment, which is huge. And here's the thing. And so this is, I'm gonna get a little bit exposed right now. And so I think in this journey to live and profess the power of plants, that I wonder at times, have I created an environment for my kids of good and bad that makes them feel a sense of judgment that emanates from me? Because it's like, well, if I'm having this, and dad's always talking about eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and I'm not having that, is he going to judge me? And so it's like, so in your experience with your kids, and you do a wonderful job of trying to, and I do this more at work than I do at home, of trying to convey how can I eat healthfully even when I'm out with the friends and at different restaurants and so forth? So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's that fourth pillar is the 80-20 rule, is
Yes.
allow some flexibility in your life and be careful with your language. I think, like I said, intuitive eaters are not perfect, and everybody has a little bit of a slightly different eating personality. There's just some people that, because they've been intuitive eaters their whole life, it's not a big deal for them to just have a bite of cookie and they put it down, because they know that when they eat too much cookie, it actually doesn't feel good in their body. So I think when you are an intuitive eater, when you're eating these ultra processed foods, you may eat a little here and there for fun, but you don't overeat them because you're tuning into your body, because it doesn't feel good when you overeat them. We've all experienced that, right? When you've had too much Halloween candy and you're just like, oh my gosh, I regret that so much, So if you really are an intuitive eater and you don't have judgments, for or against food in that way, like just saying that this food is bad or this food is good, then you are able to moderate ultra processed foods. I'm not advocating for ultra processed foods. That's just the experience that I've had. And then when it comes to our children, what we have to be careful about is demonizing foods and being overly restrictive. We do want to have a positive environment, and that includes what we have in our refrigerators, in our cupboards, in our freezer. We do want to have a lot of whole plant foods in there. Like, you don't want to have a place where you walk in and all you can find is ultra processed foods, because that doesn't support eating those whole foods, which we know are going to benefit our bodies. But if our lives and our houses are only whole plant foods, and then we say, if you eat any ultra processed foods, you're bad and you're going to get a heart attack. Now that's where the problem is going to be. And I'll tell you that I've lived both lives. And that's why I wrote this book, is because my own dieting history and my own, like I said, I can be extreme, right? So that's why I was a yo-yo dieter, is because I would get super extreme and then I would be very controlling in the house. We can't have anything, no sugar, nothing. Like, it's going to be 100% whole foods and you can't eat that. It's not good for you. But I realized that my children were starting to react in really interesting ways. Like, we would go to a birthday party, and as soon as they would get there, like the apple juice, little apple juice cartons, like they would suck that thing down so fast that the apple juice carton would like implode in itself in their cheeks. I'm like, wow, that's not normal. And so I realized that I created this situation where the restriction was causing just this obsession with the foods. And I was starting to find wrappers and things like that. And I realized that my strategy was not the appropriate strategy. So that's when I learned about intuitive eating for my children and started implementing them and had talks with them and apologized to them about my approach. And at first it was a little bit scary to allow some of those foods back into our lives, to change my language about those foods, to be a little bit more relaxed when we went out to eat and things like that. But it just balances itself out, because what you're doing is that you're helping them establish lifelong foundational habits. And you're also teaching them that they can trust their bodies. If you're constantly telling them what they can and can't eat, you're the one that's making the decisions for them. How can they trust themselves? So they have to be allowed to make a little mistakes or to feel things out, to actually test things in their bodies, like trying on an outfit. How does this feel when I eat this? What happens when I eat too much? What happens when I eat this much, And that's the only way, so that I know that when they go off to college and in their lives, they're going to have the ability to moderate themselves and make those decisions for themselves. And it's super scary as a parent, and it's really scary as a parent that has themselves had disordered eating. But that's exactly why I wrote this book, is to help parents navigate this path.
That's huge. That is. And so with I want to go back for a second, because something that I think is just exploded, our awareness, as well as just the instance of it, is really the level of mental health inside of our kids.
Yeah.
From whether it's stress and the depression, the anxiety, all these things that seem to be just building up. And so speak to that a bit as a pediatrician and so forth, and interacting and some words for our audience there. I think things to identify if your child is feeling depressed or if they're feeling a bit anxious in this era of social media and this era of where they're constantly on their phones or whatever it may be?
Yes. So the first thing I want to say is it's incredibly common. It's so common that I'm almost surprised if a child doesn't have a little touch of anxiety or depression by at least a certain age, the 12, 13-year-olds, so and it's brought on by a lot of things. Like you said, the pandemic really affected a lot of children. It changed life so much, and just the pressures of life in general. So I see it a lot, and I want parents to know that it's doesn't have to have a stigma associated with it. This is just how humans respond to this type of environment. So we need to be aware of it when children start withdrawing, when they're starting to make certain comments, then reach out to your healthcare provider. And pediatricians were trained to start screening for that at a certain age across the board, no matter what. So at age 12, we start screening for mental health. But before that, if a parent reaches out and notices that their child is struggling, we can screen earlier and we can refer. But I mean, there's children as young as 4 and 5 that I've noticed are struggling with a lot of anxiety, having a lot of issues with anxiety, and certain things start coming out, phobias, fear that something bad's going to happen to their family or their parents, certain obsessions with where's mom at all times, those kinds of things. And so I start seeing that early, and it's never too early to start seeing a professional, because what I tell parents is these skills and tools that when your kids are really young, the therapist is teaching you, but when they're older, the therapist is teaching the child. They're good for their whole life. And these are things that they can use their whole lives, and they go off to college, they get married and beyond. They can apply this to their life so that it can help them. So yeah, like I said, incredibly common. I see it all the time. And I want parents to be aware, but also not to feel that they did something wrong or that they're lacking in some way, because this happens across the board, all socioeconomic statuses, and, a lot of different children are affected.
Yeah, no, that's important. That's important. And I mean, have you noticed, in terms of when you're addressing communities at risk or overrepresented communities, so Black and Brown communities, do you have to change your messaging to increase the receptiveness of that?
Well, here in Yakima, where I live, there's a big Latin American community. So Mexican Americans and Mexicans, migrant farm workers. And in my culture, unfortunately, there's a huge stigma with mental health. So yes, you do. You have to be aware that, first of all, some parents are going to be in complete denial and be like, "Oh no, he just needs to get over it. He just needs to be grateful." And I know, because I experienced that as a child too. I was very depressed as a teenager, and I had suicidal ideation. And in my culture, it's kind of like, you just need to get over it and be grateful for everything you have. So in certain cultures, you see that, and so you really just have to talk to the parents and really help them understand that it's okay to get help. That really, it's just going to help the child thrive, and it's going to give them skills and tools that they can apply to their whole lives.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, that you're able to kind of bring the culture and address it with them, because it's a major issue, and we see it across the board. Essentially, and this is one of the things we speak to an awful lot on our platform, as you mentioned, in terms of the stress and areas of risk. Now, the things we speak to apply to everyone, but we see a concentration inside of communities of color, inside of overrepresented in terms of food insecurities, in terms of healthful foods, in terms of fast food companies, ultra processed, the advertising targeting, and then really what lends itself to the combination of early onset of disease that just is very saddening to me. That over the past 2 years, the reports that have been coming out of Journal of American Medical Association, Journal of American College of Cardiology, in terms of the prevalence of coronary disease inside our youth, 20 and 30-year-olds, the prevalence of diabetes in our kids, the mental health issues in our kids, the rates of consumption of ultra processed foods. And I think the most startling in general is the most recent article that came out of Journal of American College of Cardiology that looked at the projection over the next through 2060, I believe it was, in terms of cardiovascular disease and the comorbidities. And they said that for a Caucasian population, good news is that it seems the rates are going to drop. But the bad news, the rates are going to increase for everyone else. And so for Black and brown communities, the anticipation is the increased rates in diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol and heart disease that makes the overall burden of disease in the United States and this health crisis just amplified. So not to stand on the soapbox, but I think starting at your point is so important at your level with the kids from birth and through the age of 18 is so important and powerful with the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
it
well,
really
actually
is.
from preconception.
Oh,
Because
yes.
we even know
Absolutely.
that during pregnancy, that what a mom eats influences her child, but also is a key determinant of what habits she's going to have after that child is born. So the earlier we start, the better.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in there. I used to, one of my best jobs, I was actually paid once to be someone who promotes breastfeeding. And when I did my doctorate in public health, that my dissertation was around stress, breastfeeding, and later life obesity. And I was shocked because the term preconception, and I don't think I ever heard that in medical school as a risk factor for anything. Like I never, but once you got into the literature and actually we started doing the work, you realize that a lot of this, it's hardwired. It actually does start before conception and obviously in utero. And what the mother eat matters. And then it's crazy because it's also commercialized. You mentioned earlier, and again, you don't hear a lot of people say it, so I applaud you for saying it. You're talking about the media and its influence when it in its desire to kind of commercialize food. We argue on slave food that they weaponize food, but they have to commercialize it first. The mother eats that food, and what's shocking, last week I talked about this as well, is that then when you go to the formula companies, literally it's almost like a liquid version of the standard American diet. Now, some kids are going to need formulas. I'm not blanket knocking formula, but in place of a breastfed baby and a breastfed baby whose mom was whole food, plant-based, or close, there are massive differences. One of the jokes is that they give us the formula when we're babies, which is what I got when I was a baby, give you those formulas when you're a baby, and then when you get later in life and you're real sick and can't do anything, they give it to you again in the form of like Ensure. So, but the scary part is, to your point about the media, they profit off of it all the way through.
Yep.
Someone is profiting off of it from the formula all the way to the Ensure and all of the highly processed foods in between, which is why I like what you're saying about intuitive eating, because if you don't, someone is literally sitting down and planning to products to get you to eat so that you eat more and more and more and more and more of whatever they make. And if you don't,
I mean, that's a business model in a capitalistic system, right? Like, I mean, like, how do you make more money? You got to have people eat more of it. And how do you get people to eat more of it? Salt, sugar, fat, that's the bliss point, salt, sugar, and fat. And that's what humans are hardwired to want to have. And we have to be aware of that.
Yeah, man. This is good. And it reminds me what I say to my patients oftentimes about this conceptually. And this is how I take intuitively eating, or what you're putting in, creating that positive environment, is I oftentimes will say, well, what's your plan? Or what's your impression? So my impression is I want to live a healthful life. My impression is I want to have energy. My impression is I want to be something. So then your plan, this is what physicians do. We write our impression in our plan, right? And so if you have a broken bone, the plan is, that's my impression. My plan is, for that fracture, we're going to cast it or send you to surgery. If you have a heart attack, my plan is I take you to the cath lab, or I give you X, Y, and Z medications. If your impression as a person in the community is, I want to achieve the greatest health I can, then your plan is, what am I eating for my health? How am I eating? Why am I eating this at this moment for my mental health capacity? And so thinking of those things, and so you're actualizing your plan so you can become that, because it doesn't happen overnight. It's like the ship of Theseus, right? And so you're changing one plank at a time so you can build yourself into this new and improved $6 million man or woman over time.
I love it.
Yeah. It's interesting stuff. So I see the young lady is back in here. Let's bring her back.
Hello.
Hello there.
Nice.
Well,
Great
we were
discussion. A lot of questions in the chat. And so one of them is really as it relates to like wondering what's the best interventions are as it relates to the depression and how that affects children.
So definitely getting a good therapist if you have access to that.
Okay.
But just like Dr. Batiste was talking about, I practice lifestyle medicine. So whenever we're going to try to optimize somebody's mental health, the brain is not disconnected from the body. It's all one system. So we definitely, need to address nutrition, getting some more leafy greens and berries in the diet, more fiber. We have to make sure we're supporting a healthy gut microbiome, because we know now that microbiome is related to our mental health and can increase our risk of anxiety or depression if we're not properly feeding our gut microbiome. But something that's really huge in kids is sleep, especially teenagers that are presenting with depression and anxiety. They're not sleeping. So as y'all know, because y'all have been in med school and residency, what happens when you're sleep deprived? Suddenly the world seems a very bleak place. Like I experience this anytime I have sleep deprivation. So trying to practice sleep hygiene, get them on a good, consistent schedule is very, very important. Obviously, managing stress, making sure that they're moving their bodies, getting out in nature. So these are all things that I definitely address, and that are things that are easy for you to just start doing on your own while you wait to get into the professional. These are things that you can start tweaking in your own household.
And as you're having those types of conversations, I mean, is it harder to convince the parents of what's needed or the children?
It really depends on the age of the child. So obviously teenagers, y'all know you got teenagers. We can't force teenagers to do things. So they themselves kind of have to believe and feel willing to try some of these interventions. And sometimes it takes multiple conversations, like over and over and over again, talking to them about these things before they get it. But eventually they do. Now, if you have a younger child, parents usually totally are on board with making these changes, but everybody's life is so hectic. Some parents work 2-3 jobs trying to coordinate the schedules. Some kids have practice till 10 p.m., some of these things. And so trying to coordinate these schedules often does take a little bit of time to get everybody on board with everything. But I would say that parents usually are in agreement, but it's the teenagers that they need a little bit of convincing.
Yeah, as well as the devices, right? So trying to get them to come off of those at night as it relates to sleeping and how that affects them.
Absolutely.
Good.
Dr. Walsh or Batiste, did you guys want to add anything to that?
When it comes to childhood depression, I mentioned the serotonin in the gut earlier. One of the other things is that sugar actually does deplete the serotonin stores in the brain. And so we literally, because the food is so processed and there is so much sugar in the foods, we're literally feeding kids and adults foods that actually will make it harder to not be anxious and depressed. So I like what Dr. Yami says. I mean, you really do have to begin to move away from those foods and gingerly. And again, therapy is the background. But I wish I say it all the time, I wish I'd known this stuff when I was a kid, because you were popping down Pop-Tarts and you feel good. You feel good after you eat a Pop-Tart, but
crashing later.
What we've learned, literally it affects our mental health significantly later on when we're eating basically, drinking Kool-Aid and eating Pop-Tarts. That's a scary thought in hindsight. I mean, one day the world's gonna look back and say, what were they feeding their children? What were they thinking?
Yeah.
Wow.
I totally agree with you, Dr. Walsh. I actually recorded a podcast episode recently on the things I wish I could tell my younger self. One of them was eat more fiber for sure. And another one was sleep. Because I remember when I was at the peak of my depression, I was staying up talking on the phone till 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how I thought that was going to help my depression, but obviously I was extremely sleep deprived. Also a high achieving child. So, staying up late, getting up like at 6 o'clock in the morning, going a full day of school, doing all these things and not feeling good at all. So I think that it is important that we do tell our kids. But one thing that it's important to know about kids is that they're listening, even though they may not necessarily act like they are. So it's important that we keep emphasizing these concepts in a loving, non-forceful manner so that they're hearing it. And then one day they'll come around and they'll be willing to give it a try.
Well, yeah, and I hate to add this, but they've got to see it mirrored in us,
Yes.
right? So we can't tell you go to bed and then we're up till 1 or 2 o'clock in the
Binging
morning.
Netflix.
Yes.
Right. So,
Role modeling is so
It's a-
important for children.
right.
And let me throw in one last quick thing about
Sure.
sleep that I've started talking more about, and that is what the research all shows is sleep is the time when the brain heals from emotional trauma.
Yes.
Mhm.
That is profound. So, we talk about, CBT therapies and ways to get people with PTSD to sleep better. To sleep better. But if you don't sleep, it doesn't matter what therapy you get, because it's while we sleep that our brains actually heal from trauma in an emotional way.
Mhm.
And that says a lot about what happens to kids today, because what Dr. Yami said is very true. Sometimes you're staying up late to be entertained, to be distracted. Back in the day, we were on the phone, but today, they can stream and text and TikTok up all
And
night.
the TV never goes off, right? It would go off at midnight. You would just have that boop and that American flag and static.
And the flag.
All right, y'all are dating yourself now, okay?
I am, but it's the truth anyhow.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, what are the 4 things that a family can do to impact obesity outcomes in their children?
So all the things we've been talking about, honor hunger and satiety, eat whole plant foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds, put them in every meal and snack, center your meals around whole plant foods, but do it in a way that you're honoring this hunger and satiety. So just like I said before, when we're worried about the body size of our children and we're saying, stop eating that, don't eat that, you're eating too much, it backfires and causes the opposite reaction. So instead, provide an abundance of these whole plant foods but have a little bit of flexibility there, and create a positive environment. So just like you were saying, Danette, you have to role model. I have plenty of parents that they don't eat vegetables. So anybody can learn to like any food, no matter how old you are, through exposure. So I teach this to parents, the principles to parents for their kids, but sometimes the parents need it too. So just keep exposing yourself to these foods and expose your children to them. And over time, you'll acquire the taste. And, just go for it for the long haul. What you need to tweak in your lifestyle so that you continue to establish these sustainable habits instead of just doing it for a week or 2 and then falling off and going back to the fast food and, the ultra processed foods for the majority of your meals.
Absolutely. And then the other question that we received was, in terms of the obesity question as a pediatrician with parents and their children, I'm sure there are probably times where the parent is, I'm concerned about my child's weight. But are you also kind of saying where the parent doesn't have concern about it and they should? How do you kind of bridge the gap between the two?
And Dr. Batiste knows my emphasis on this really has to do with habits and behavior. So I try not to emphasize body size or weight because this is not helpful, because nobody has direct control over the size or weight of their body, but we do have more control over our habits and behaviors, what we're buying at the grocery store, what we're preparing for dinner, those kinds of things. So when I take my thorough history and I'm seeing that a child is not eating any fiber rich foods and eating a lot of ultra processed foods and not sleeping and, those things, I'm more emphasizing how can we make changes here instead of trying to make the parent feel ashamed or bad about the size of their child's body. Yes, there's definitely going to be parents that don't think that anything is wrong, or they may be in denial because it's so overwhelming to them that they just kind of compartmentalize and don't even think about it. But my job as a pediatrician is to kind of look at this lifestyle pattern and say, Where can we make some changes to bring more of these healthful habits and behaviors? And then as you make those changes over time, the body size is going to adapt to those habits and behaviors. I'm not trying to make people any certain size or have them be any certain percentile on that curve.
Right. And it sounds like that number one, it's going to take time. It's not an overnight fix, so that you kind of have to manage everyone's expectations around that. And then it also sounds like what your process is more so asking questions versus making assumptions on what they're eating, so that not only are you hearing it, but they're hearing it as well. When they tell you, I had Pop-Tarts, like what is your breakfast like? And Kool-Aid, right? So by them saying it, you hear it and they hear it. And it's kind of hard to ignore that versus just focusing on their size.
Yeah. And some families, they just simply don't have the knowledge, and they just don't know. And so whenever I tell them, this is a very low fiber food, this is why we're seeing some of these issues. How can we start making some swaps? Then that's when they start learning and start testing out different things. But, it's confusing, right? Because media and magazines say a certain thing of what is health promoting. And we know that the standard American diet just is not health promoting in general. So most people are on the standard American diet, and children in our country are deriving 70% of their calories from ultra processed foods.
Wow.
70.
Wow.
So, that's what I'm typically seeing in families, is a lot of ultra processed foods. So trying to slowly change those habits and help parents understand where they can achievably make those habits. It does take time.
And we know sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say Madison Avenue does a great job. I mean, that's where all the marketing in this country comes from. It's to dupe people like my mother into believing that they were giving us a healthy, these were healthy foods. I mean, you were taught, my mother thought we had to drink cow's milk to be healthy.
And
that's
what we were told, right?
They told us, that's what we saw at school. That was on the board in school, a little nutrition thing. And it's unfortunate that in fact people profit off of lies. And I don't think that's true capitalism at that point. I think that's a subverted version of it, that you would literally lie to people to make money, and that's the danger, because our kids are actually being lied to. And I like what Dr. Yami said, if someone doesn't go in and show the parent that this actually isn't the best way, they're going to keep doing what they're doing, because everything around us says that's just what you're supposed to eat. And the diseases that come, they just come. They don't come because of what you ate. They just come because you got older.
There's no causality. Okay, last question for me. And it is, we know, like, in terms of the 80-20 rule, like, it's more about 80% of what you eat and 20% is, just the exercise things. But when kids are younger and they have a higher metabolism, is it still 80-20, or is there more, more emphasis that the exercise can play into, the child's, health?
So when I talk about the 80-20 rule, what I'm referring is that 80% of the time, try to be as health promoting as possible in what you're feeding your family, so that you can have a 20% wiggle room. So that's in the not trying to be overly restrictive, get into this, like, we can never have any of these kinds of more play foods or treat foods. And that's what I'm talking about with the 80-20 rule. But when it comes to exercise, younger children are naturally active. I mean, if you've ever lived with a toddler, you know that they never stop. And I don't even know how they have that much energy, and it's very exhausting. But research has shown that by the time they get into middle school, they start to become more sedentary, and then it just gets worse and worse every year. So I would say definitely encourage your children to get outside. And this is where role modeling and family activities is really important, because we can't be sitting on the couch and then, say play outside. We got to say, hey, let's all go for a walk. Let's go for a hike. Let's go for a bike ride. Let's do this all together as a family.
Right.
Because otherwise it's very difficult for them to go out there at a certain age. And then, of course, getting them involved in sports is a fabulous way to organize. Sports is a great way to get kids active. But yeah, let kids play, let them move. It's very important for their health.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes. I think we could probably keep on talking for quite some time, because it's so our kids are our future, right? And so investing in them is investing in ourselves in the future. And so we can go on and on and on. I have 1,000 things, but I will stop myself now as we're kind of wrapping up this hour here. And we want to, number one, just thank you for your time and for your knowledge and your grace and for sharing your wisdom and what you've given to your patients and to the community and the world at large. I mean, I think that it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So thank you for coming on with us, and we'll leave any last words for the audience or for us, and for us with the Pop-Tarts and the Kool-Aid that we can put down.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, and I am really grateful for y'all and the work that y'all are doing too. It's so important, and the more platforms we can have spreading this knowledge and empowering people, just really, that's so important to me, is that people know that they have the ability to make these changes and that they don't have to be destined to have a life where they're plagued by these chronic diseases. So that's really important. And I think the final thought that I want to leave for parents is that I don't want any parent to leave this show today feeling ashamed or feeling guilty. I want you to know that your kids love you, that you're doing the best you can. And that's all I'm asking you to do, is do the best you can, put one foot in front of the other, but have fun feeding your children. Have fun learning how to include more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds into their diet. Make mistakes. It's okay. And on your own journey, on your own path, learn how to like these foods yourself too. And you'll see months, years from now, you'll look back and you'll realize how far you've come. But it starts with that positive energy moving forward. Don't leave feeling bad, leave feeling good, because you have knowledge that can take you that next step in promoting a healthy lifestyle for your children.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I'll just top off by saying, Dr. Yami, you are an inspiration. And the work that you do is just so important. And it's just so wonderful to see someone like you inspiring parents for our youth and for our kids. And so just keep up the good work. You're an inspiration to us. So we thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yes. All right. And for those of you out there who are listening, I'm sorry, Jeanette, did you have anything you wanted to kind of throw out too as well?
Oh, no. I mean, those affirming words as parents is just so powerful, right?
Yeah,
like, you know, we have those conversations. Oh my God, you're like, I'm failing. I'm failing. How am I, like, why are they, and so just hearing those words are very inspirational as a parent, as we go through this journey, forever. So thank you for those.
Yes.
And you bring up a good point. You said something that I don't want the audience to miss out on, is the fact that you brought up the point that your body size is your body size. And so we are all not going to be some stick thin model or whatever it is. We all have different genetics and frames that are there. And it matters what you are doing on a day-by-day basis, as opposed to just the perceived social standard of what you're supposed to be. Now, we all know what we're doing. And so the important thing is do what we're supposed to. Right.
Amen.
And follow that. So thank you for that. I think that's affirming in this era where we're supposed to look a particular way, act a particular way on a regular basis. And I think that's empowering too as well for the youth out there going forwards. So thank you. Look forward to future collaborations and everything else.
I'm here to serve anytime.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We will be back in October, Eric and I, and Danette Batiste, and we look forward to, and you all make sure you check out Dr. Yami on her sites. They've been going across, buy her book, Intuitive Eating, support her on social media too as well. And we look forward to kind of many more interactions. Stay tuned. Take care.
Right.